Hey everyone, my name's Radio Mike, this is The Inside of My Mind, and today I wanted to talk all about Green Day's new studio album, Father of All. Let's get into it. Okay, so 4 years on from Green Day's 2016 record Revolution Radio and the end of the 2010s, which was a pretty weird decade for the band when you think about it. They put out Uno, Dos, and Tre at the start, that trilogy of albums that had to follow on from the incredibly commercially and critically successful albums American Idiot and to a lesser degree 21st Century Breakdown in the 2000s. Uno, Dos, and Tre were all sort of commercially unsuccessful. The fans didn't particularly warm to them, and critically they didn't do very well either. Revolution Radio was definitely considered a return to form for the band in some respects, but the band has definitely done something weird again, starting the 2020s with one of the weirdest and wackiest albums of their career. Not to mention it's also the shortest album they've ever done. It's a 26-minute album, and unsurprisingly, it sort of seems to lack any sound structure or particular feeling or vibe in it. The album art borrows heavily from American Idiot, with a unicorn vomiting rainbows on the front, but if you're hoping for something similar to American Idiot, then you're definitely going to be left scratching your head. This album is seriously weird. But I think we kind of got the idea that this was going to be a different sound from the band from the very first single, Father of All, the title track, which was really, really unique for Green Day. It's a kind of sound we'd never really heard from them before. It's got these really raw falsetto vocals from Billie Joe that we haven't heard much from in the past. And honestly, this track originally caught me off guard just because it was so far removed from anything that I could have or would have expected Green Day to do next. It's really grown on me over time. It's quite a cool track after repeated listen. Going back to the album art for a second, I really do think the chosen artwork is really reflective and speaks a lot about the creation of this album. A lot of people are saying that Father of All is a record deal breaker for the band. This is their last record that they're making signed to Warner Music, and that they haven't put much effort into it just so they can get out of their contract and do something new. And there may be some truth to that, but I don't know if that's a good enough excuse for having an album that doesn't seem to have any identity and just seems to be this raw collection of songs. If you look back at all of the band's albums from this century so far, the branding of them all are so strong. The heart-shaped hand grenade of American Idiot, Christian and Gloria kissing on the front of 21st Century Breakdown, and even Uno, Dos, and Tre have a very signature visual style that brands that trilogy. Father of All, for some reason, takes American Idiot's artwork and kind of just ruins it with some weird ketchup Green Day logo and a title and a unicorn. It just seems quite lazy, and I think that really does reflect the album. Bizarre, unexpected, somewhat uninspired, a little directionless, I suppose. But more on the album art later. The second two singles, Fire, Ready, Aim, and Oh Yeah, both sort of continue the perplexing nature of the album. Similarly to Father of All, Fire, Ready, Aim did start to grow on me after some time as being quite a catchy, funky, upbeat rock and roll song. It reminds me a lot of the Foxborough Hot Tubs, which was a Green Day side project that was heavily geared towards garage rock and classic rock and roll sounds back in the mid-2000s. Oh Yeah samples Joan Jett, which definitely seems to confirm this idea that perhaps the album as a whole and the idea of the album as a whole is to be a tribute to the classic rock and roll bands that Billie Joe Armstrong may have listened to when he was growing up. I think that's kind of how I'm treating it at the moment. That being said, the Joan Jett samples in Oh Yeah just fall totally flat. The song feels completely raw, not in a good way. It's really empty and lacking in any substance, and probably one of the weakest tracks on the album, as well as in the Green Day discography as a whole. And I guess while listening to this song and the entire album, I just kept thinking the same thing. Why? With its incredibly short runtime, I was able to listen to this album and ask why several times upon its release. Each time being no clearer about what its purpose or message is, but still kind of enjoying the music. And I guess we've gotten to this point in pop culture now where We think that every album and everything has to have a concept or a meaning, but that hasn't always been the case, and I'll get onto that a bit more later. Aside from Oh Yeah, which is terribly titled as well, the slow and seemingly hip-hop beat-inspired track towards the end of the album, Junkies on a High, may also be one of the worst Green Day songs ever recorded. It's just this really slow, weak track that offers no catchiness or momentum. It's also one of the longest tracks on the album, and you can really tell because it just drags on. There are some gems that you'll hear as you continue through this short album, such as Stab You in the Heart, which is a fast, upbeat, garage rock and roll track that is reminiscent a lot of Elvis Presley, particularly the song Jailhouse Rock, in which it is really, really similar to. Although it also offers a really familiar riff in its chorus that is pretty much exactly lifted from the song Fuck Time on the album Dose. Again, this reminiscence and this resemblance to music by artists like Elvis Presley seem to add weight to the theory that Father of All is this weird and wacky tribute to rock and roll as a genre, and the old school rock and roll artists that don't necessarily get as much time anymore. The longest track on the album at just under 4 minutes, which is actually considerably short when you think about Green Day's discography in the past 20 years, is called I Was a Teenage Teenager. It begins with a really dull bass line from Mike Dirnt, but it actually becomes something kind of more developed and interesting with a catchy chorus that sounds almost like Billy Joe Armstrong's son, Joey Armstrong's band Swimmers. But one of the shorter songs on the album and the definite standout would have to be Meet Me on the Roof. This really chill, upbeat classic rock and roll song that has like Beatles vibes and everything in between. The song is awesome and it's got these great kind of like echo vocals and ostinatos where, you know, Billy Joe's like, oh, come meet me on the window, and then you get window. It really does harken back to some of those nice, short, simple Beatles songs from the past, like Twist and Shout, Help, maybe even something like I Wanna Hold Your Hand. This is definitely the best song on the album. It's catchy, it's fun, and stylistically again reminds me of the Foxborough Hot Tubs. Aside from that, I feel like maybe the whole idea of this album from Green Day's point of view was to write an album that was just fun to make and perform for them. And an album that didn't have to take itself so seriously like they have done for the past 2 decades, especially with politically charged albums like American Idiot, 21st Century Breakdown, and Revolution Radio. I feel like every time Green Day does put out an album, there are always going to be fans that complain and say, it doesn't sound like them, or this is not what we want, and they're never going to be able to please the fans, and I think that's where the album artwork comes back into it. It's like so many people are wanting just another American Idiot or another Dookie or another Nimrod or whatever the album of the past that they enjoyed might be, and using the American Idiot cover and splashing this weirdness on top of it is them saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to do that. We're not going to do what you want. We're going to do what we want, and we're going to do an album that we want to make and is fun for us. And we're still going to play those old songs, but we're just going to make albums that are fun for us, and you can choose to like them or not like them. And in some ways, I'm really happy that Green Day are starting the decade with something that's made for them, something that's totally experimental and maybe more about them falling back in love with writing and making music and not worrying as much about what their fans want. But let me know what you think. I'd love to know what your favorite tracks are. Mine is definitely Meet Me on the Roof, and my least favorite track would probably have to be Oh Yeah. Like and subscribe to my channel. I'm gonna do a bunch of these reviews, and listen to my podcast, and that's pretty much it. My name's been Radio Mike. This has been The Inside of My Mind. Catch ya!